Samuel Reed, a man in his 30s, leads a seemingly ordinary life. One day, while walking home from work, he takes a shortcut through an unfamiliar alley. At the end of the alley, he encounters an old, dilapidated door that he's never seen before. Curiosity gets the better of him, and he steps through the door, finding himself in a long, dimly lit corridor. The corridor stretches endlessly in both directions, lined with countless doors. Each door leads to a different dimension, each more terrifying than the last. As Samuel struggles to find his way back, he realizes that each door reveals a different aspect of his deepest fears and darkest memories. Samuel is returning home after a long day at work when he stumbles upon a door in an alleyway that he's never noticed before. It's an old wooden door, weathered and covered in strange symbols. Despite his initial hesitation, he opens the door and steps through. On the other side, he finds himself in a long corridor, dimly lit by flickering overhead lights. The walls are covered in peeling wallpaper, and the air is thick with the scent of decay. As he looks around, he notices that the corridor stretches endlessly in both directions, lined with doors that all look the same. Confused and disoriented, Samuel decides to try one of the doors, hoping it will lead him back to the street. Samuel opens the first door he encounters. On the other side is a dimly lit room filled with old, decrepit furniture. The room feels strangely familiar, and as he steps inside, he realizes it's a distorted version of his childhood home. The air is thick with tension, and the shadows seem to move on their own. As he explores the room, he hears whispers coming from the walls, calling his name in a voice that sounds like his mother's. Suddenly, the room begins to close in on him, the walls squeezing tighter and tighter. In a panic, he flees back into the corridor, the door slamming shut behind him. Back in the corridor, Samuel notices that the walls seem to be shifting slightly, as if the corridor itself is alive and changing. The overhead lights flicker more frequently, casting eerie shadows that dance along the walls. The corridor feels colder, and he begins to hear distant, echoing footsteps that aren't his own. Fearful but determined to find a way out, he continues down the corridor, passing by door after door, each one labeled with a different cryptic symbol. The further he walks, the more the corridor seems to warp, with the floor occasionally tilting at odd angles and the walls bulging in unnatural ways. Samuel opens another door, and this time he's confronted with a scene from his past, a moment he wishes he could forget. He steps into a room where he sees a younger version of himself, sitting alone in a darkened apartment, surrounded by bottles and the remnants of a broken relationship. The younger Samuel is consumed by guilt and regret, and as he watches, the room begins to fill with a thick, black smoke. The smoke seems to seep into his skin, filling him with an overwhelming sense of dread and despair. He stumbles back into the corridor, coughing and gasping for breath as the door slams shut behind him. Desperate to escape, Samuel opens another door only to find himself in a pitch-black void. There's no floor, no walls, just an endless expanse of darkness. As he steps forward, he hears a low, guttural growl, and suddenly, he's surrounded by monstrous creatures with glowing red eyes. The creatures are embodiments of his deepest fears, amorphous, ever-changing forms that taunt him with whispers of failure and doom. The void itself seems to close in on him, pressing down like a weight on his chest. Just as the creatures are about to overtake him, he finds the door and throws himself back into the corridor. The corridor has become a twisted, nightmarish version of itself, with the walls and floor writhing as if alive. Samuel's sense of time and space begins to fracture, and he starts hearing voices in his head, whispering that he'll never escape. He opens another door, hoping against hope that it will lead him out, but instead, he's thrust into a room filled with mirrors. Each mirror shows a different version of himself, some twisted and monstrous, others broken and crying. The reflections begin to move on their own, stepping out of the mirrors and surrounding him. They start to close in, their whispers growing louder and more frantic, until he can't distinguish his own thoughts from theirs. On the brink of madness, Samuel stumbles upon a door at the very end of the corridor. Unlike the others, this door is pristine, glowing with an otherworldly light. Desperate, he opens it, only to find himself standing back where he started, in the alleyway, facing the old wooden door. But something is different. The world around him is subtly wrong. The colors are off, the sounds are distorted, and the people around him seem empty. He realizes with horror that he's not truly out of the corridor. He's in a dimension that mimics reality, but is fundamentally broken. The door behind him slams shut, and when he turns around, it has vanished, leaving him trapped in this twisted version of the real world. Samuel is never seen again. Those who knew him recall that he became increasingly paranoid and withdrawn in the days leading up to his disappearance, speaking of endless corridors and doors that led to nightmares. The alleyway where he vanished remains, but the old door is gone, leaving behind only a faded outline on the wall. Occasionally, people passing by the alley report hearing faint whispers and seeing fleeting shadows, as if something is still lurking just beyond the veil of reality, waiting for the next curious soul to stumble upon it.